All right, guys, welcome to Chat with the Brewer Live. My name is Seth. We're straight and live here from Wooden Legs Brewing Company, and we've got Brad on the other side here. Brad, this is probably a first for us. This is a handheld cam. This is the ultimate selfie here.
Oh yeah.
All right, Brad, we know who we are, but I think everybody wants to know who you guys are, what you do, where you're at. I mean, we've got a whole series of questions, but let's start with the name of your company and where you guys are located at.
Sure thing. We are Nektar Meadery, though the mead is becoming a little bit just a part of what we do. Primarily we make mead, but we're now doing ciders and beers as well. And we're just outside of Detroit, Michigan, literally a half a mile north of 8 Mile, which I'm sure everybody's heard of at this point. And we basically started out just homebrewers, you know, and now living the dream.
Excellent. Now, how long ago was that? You guys, how old is B Nektar here?
We opened in August of 2008. We had been brewing beers since '98, me and a buddy of mine, and my wife got laid off. I got laid off in 2008, and we said, hey, let's make a go of this mead thing. Nobody was really doing it, and you know, went from there.
Well, we're going to pour some samples here in the pub for the people watching. We'll get a couple. I think I've got 3 for you to describe. Maybe I'll let you tell us. I'll start pouring them here. Why don't you tell me a little about Zombie Killer here? I'm going to pour some around, and if you could give us a little background on that.
Sure. Zombie Killer was kind of our first of the session series that we'll call them, and just like lower ABV products. You know, up until then, everything was about 14% alcohol. And the truth was, is as much as I love mead, I just couldn't drink that much of it. I mean, honestly, you know, if I got through a bottle, you know, with my wife in a night, that was kind of a big deal. And I said, well, if I can't drink that much, how's anybody else going to? And so we started making the low ABV stuff. Zombie Killer was the first one, and kind of just changed the company for the better.
Well, as it pours here, it's almost got a rose, and I probably can't pick it up on the webcam here, but it's crystal clear and maybe even has a rose hue to this. Now,
Right.
You are the first meadery we've had on. That's probably an important distinction here. Why don't you tell us exactly what makes a meadery, and what is your official title? I don't think it's a brewer. What's the official title of a mead maker?
Well, mead maker is exactly the title that we use. My official title right now, I think I'm head dishwasher and janitor.
That's probably the truth here. So this, from the side, and I can taste them, this has cherries. Tell us a little bit about the Zombie Killer. Where'd you come up with the name? And
Sure.
tell us some of the flavor notes that we're going to be tasting here.
Sure. Flavor-wise, it's a apple cider base. Everything's made with fresh pressed cider, and we use Michigan star thistle honey and tart Montmorency Michigan cherry juice in the mead. You know, we kind of go back and forth with like mead, cider on this one because it seems to be a lot easier to talk to people about ciders. So for us, this is kind of like our gateway product. The name came about when we were actually making the very first pilot batch. We made the product for a restaurant down in North Carolina called Cherry Blossom. And my distributor said, hey, you know, we need a mead in kegs with cherry in it. And so we, you know, kind of made up a small, like 90-gallon batch just to send to them. And by the time it was done, we called the distributor and said, hey, that cherry mead and keg's ready. And they're like, huh? So, yeah, the Cherry Blossom restaurant. And they're like, oh, yeah, they went out of business. So I said, hey, do you still want the kegs? And they're like, you know, we'll take a couple of them. So we're sitting on all these kegs. We're thinking, well, we should probably just bottle this and put it out there. And let's call it something fun. And one of the guys goes, let's call it ah! And we're looking at him sideways like, well, what the hell are you talking about? He's reading the graphic novel of The Walking Dead, and he's like, that's what zombies say, and he starts laughing. And if you look at the bottom of the description, it still has the ah! So we ended up just settling on the name Zombie Killer as kind of like a second choice, I guess. My cousin at the time was living out in Arizona, doodled up some artwork on a whiteboard and sent it over, and finally we ended up, you know, getting some good clean artwork, and the label was born.
On the side here, in addition to the R, and I probably have mispronounced that in some way, it actually says naturally gluten-free. All of the ciders gluten-free?
Yeah, Meads and ciders are all naturally gluten-free. It's only when you get into kind of the hybrid products like braggots, which is a hybrid of mead and beer, do you really introduce gluten. It's the grain that introduces the gluten.
Well, I think the consensus around here is this is very approachable. I think everybody says they've enjoyed this one. The next one, what do we got? What are we pouring next here, Miss Angela? Black Fang. Now this has a distinctly different color. This, I would say, this is this almost looks like a red wine type of hue to it.
Yeah, a lot of blackberry in there. It's blackberry and clove, a little bit of orange zest, and Michigan wildflower honey. This is actually, that's what I was just drinking out of the coffee cup earlier, was a kind of a higher ABV version of that, mulled with some spices. But this one, the vampire theme obviously, is noticeable on the label. That was based on, growing up and all these kids smoking the clove cigarettes were always the goth kind of kids and vampire-like, and so we're like, let's play around with that.
I'm glad you brought up the clove cigarettes. I think I heard a whisper in the background here that somebody said clove cigarettes. So that is, and in the good way, not even the smoke way, but the taste of the clove, it really, really comes strong in this one.
Yeah, I don't think it's overpowering. I mean, during the creation, we were definitely playing with more or less clove, and clove seems to be one of those polarizing kind of flavors. Some people just absolutely hate it, and some people love it.
And some people only eat or smell or drink clove from like October 31st to January 1st. Like that's an incredibly seasonal thing I've seen.
Yeah.
It's maybe not as bad as pumpkin, but clove definitely invokes feelings of a season.
And we've talked about, the idea of taking that one seasonal, but we're still such a young company that we're just we're in the, well, let's see how it goes kind of phase.
So I think we're going to have one final one here. Tell me about the Necro Mango Con. Is that pronunciation close for you?
Yeah, Necro Mango Con. We're, as you're picking up, we're kind of nerds. We're definitely into movies and comic books and all things, food and flavor pairings. Necro Mango Con is a mango and orange blossom mead made with crushed black peppercorn. And so we ferment that with a saison ale yeast, and it's kind of like our saison,
Again, the color pours out incredible. I would liken this to a very clear, almost a champagne hue, but I mean completely transparent, no turbidity. Do you have multiple stage filter? How do you get your meads so beautiful?
It's a couple of different steps really, and every mead's a little bit different. The ciders are a pain because of all the pectin. But the meads can settle out pretty easily with just some, sparkloid and a plate and frame filter. But we're upgrading technology like everybody else who's growing, looking at cross flow filtration and other types of filtration.
And this one's very good. You said that's black pepper that you have, isn't there?
Yep, whole black peppercorns. We cracked. We actually ended up buying a commercial coffee grinder. Since we play around with so many flavors, the big challenge is trying to figure out how to take what we do conceptually, in test batches and turn that into a commercially viable product. So we actually went and bought a commercial coffee grinder, and this is used just for our cloves and black pepper.
So you don't make your morning blend in that? I'm sure Morning Joe would be a rude wake-up with a whole bunch of clove dust and black pepper dust in it.
We got such a good coffee shop down the street that we just stop in there.
So this is we're getting kind of a preview of your brewery here. How big of a meadery do you have? What's your annual capacity, you guys, and where are you located there?
Well, we're
in terms of the downtown.
Just a warehouse outside the city limits of Detroit, in a town called Ferndale. Ferndale is kind of the the artsy musician and artists, kind of that bohemian type of crowd, and that's where my wife and I lived, and so that's where we started the meadery. But this is a 7,500 square foot facility we're in right now. Our original space was about 1,200 square feet, and we just took possession of a 20,000 square foot facility where we're building out a new tap room, offices. The brewery is going to be there, and then we're eventually going to move all the mead and cider production there as well.
So in terms of craft products in Michigan, South Dakota's craft beer scene is growing. It's definitely on the rise, but not at a mature level yet. But we always hear about crazy stuff coming out of Michigan. I know your guys' Brewer Guild is super active and big out there. Can you give us kind of a heads up or a lowdown of what's going on in the craft industry in Michigan?
Michigan is just a great place to be. Last I heard, we've got over 150 breweries in the state, which I think puts us at like number 5 or something in the country. And just really good products. I mean, from as out there as like Jolly Pumpkin to, big name, everyday grocery store available beers like Founders and Bell's. And then a lot of unknowns, things like Kunin, which, if you're trading online, you've probably heard of Kunin. Really good food type, culinary inspired type breweries like Shorts, and the list just keeps going on and on and on. We're also number 1 for meaderies in the country.
We have yet to develop a meader here in South Dakota. We have a lot of farm wineries. That's kind of a big thing that the state has allowed us to do is produce some artisan wines. So with all of the meads that we've tried, and I know we've only got 3 here tonight, but then you had a whole list of things you distribute. Which one is your favorite?
Right now I'm loving a mead called Kill All the Golfers. It's a Arnold Palmer inspired with black tea and lemon juice with honey.
So where do these come from? These it seems like these ideas for meads come from very different directions. Is it 1 or 2 meads that you sit around to drink before you come up with the next flavor, or do you just walk through a Whole Foods and just kind of start plucking stuff off the shelf?
It's a little bit of both. A lot of times it comes from, watching, like the Necromango Con was a pepper episode from Alton Brown on the Food Network. Food is definitely one of our biggest inspirations. We're constantly trying to, recreate different flavors. We've got a mead coming out called There Will Be Blood Orange later on in end of the first quarter this year, and it's got a bunch of Chinese 5-spice, Thai basil, blood oranges, and orange blossom honey. We're just constantly trying to pair different flavorings that you find elsewhere in the culinary world.
That's fantastic. You said you're building a new tap room. You're going to do food service there as well?
Yeah, we are. Very small scale at first, sandwiches, like panini press, maybe a little conveyor pizza oven. Nothing too grand. We're still going to be in an industrial park. We are not in a downtown area. We are literally off the beaten path in a warehouse. There's really no drive-by traffic to speak of, so it's going to be kind of interesting to see what kind of crowd we draw in. But our tap room right now is literally just the front of our warehouse. It's kind of like having drinks in somebody's garage.
Sounds like you've got an active brewery going on there. What project do you guys got going on this week?
I don't know, actually. Just probably one of the many batches that we're constantly rotating in. Most likely a zombie killer. It seems like every other batch is a zombie killer.
Well, we were just discussing here that some of us may make it to Detroit, but probably more realistically, our viewers here and our regulars here are going to have to find the local bar. Now, you guys have it in bottles and on draft as well, and South Dakota's a relatively new market for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's like most things, it just kind of happens when people reach out to us and we get along. It's always just kind of about building those relationships, and South Dakota wasn't really on my mind, but we've just got such great connections out there, so it worked out pretty well. It's kind of a no-brainer.
We've had a number of breweries turn up in South Dakota thinking that they could hunt pheasant all year. Unfortunately, that is a limited season, just so you know. So if you do come to South Dakota, come and shoot some of the pheasant, but only shoot them in the fall.
All right, we'll do.
Well, I'm going to open it up to questions here. We've got a number of people that have sat along and listened to a couple of these. We'll probably see, I think you've probably got one for sure, and then we'll pass the mic a little bit. I'll have you introduce yourself, or at least for the camera here, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about mead.
Hi, Brad. I am Nathan Holbeck. I'm from Sioux Falls. And I was just wondering, could you drink a whole bottle of episode 13 in one go?
Could I? Is that a challenge?
I think that might be a challenge. and maybe you could describe a little bit about episode 13, because I think it's coming to the market here probably next week.
Yeah. Episode 13 is, for me personally, very special. It was really the first recipe that I thought was kind of off the charts in terms of the types of creative things we were doing. The very first batch of that was made in my basement. I actually had a whole bourbon barrel sitting in my basement aging, and it was awesome. None of my friends had anything like that. But we approached it very much like you'd approach a beer. We started with the idea of like, all right, if we've got these really light malts and we want to introduce some darker, richer character to it, you want to do it in a smaller proportion to the light malt. Well, in the honey, we decided to do the same thing. The mix is like an 85% orange blossom and about 15% buckwheat honey. And buckwheat has a really rich, earthy, molasses type of character to it, and we thought that it would be nice to balance, with that lighter citrusy orange blossom honey, and it would really, much like the dude's rug, really tie the room together when you throw it in a bourbon barrel. So that was the concept behind it, and you do pull out a lot of vanilla notes, some toffee, some molasses, and there is that hint of the citrus orange blossom in the background as well. And then you're definitely obviously going to pull some bourbon notes from it. It's probably one of the more complex meads that we do.
So that's a good point, actually. Tell us a little bit about the honeys. You mentioned two. You mentioned buckwheat is the first one. How many do you have access to, and where do you get them? How important is that to your final product? Are they from local bees there, or how does that work?
Well, we try and source as much locally as we can, but as you may know, Michigan is not a hotbed for the orange crops, so we don't grow a lot of oranges here, and so it's hard to get orange blossom honey. So when we can't get the type of honey that we're looking for, we obviously have to go out of state. We always want to go and work directly with beekeepers, and those beekeepers are the ones that can really tell us the most about where those hives are being placed. The placement of the beehives makes a world of difference. You could have the same bees in an orange grove producing a honey that has literally a citrus character to it, almost like the white pith of the orange. And then you move those hives across the country to, let's say, Michigan to get the star thistle, and you get a completely different honey character. And so it's the plant and the flower that makes the difference in the color, the flavor, and the aroma of the honey. And so like any other ingredient, taking into consideration what that characteristic is, you can blend it not just with other honeys, but with other fruits. Like in the case of the Nektar mango con, that mango goes really well with that orange blossom honey.
We have a lot of corn and soybean here, so if you need some corn and soybean flavored honey, send us some breed. They're going to have to be, they'll probably have to be as hardy as Michigan bees, though. We'll kill them off pretty quick.
Oh, very hardy.
I've got Chris here. He's our lead brewer. He's the one doing all the work in the back. He was actually walking back and forth, working whilst doing this. I think he's got a couple questions for you.
All right.
How you doing, buddy?
Hey.
I guess the main question I've got is, we've been working lately, we've been trying to get some projects off the ground with a local vineyard here, and we've been trying to get a cider going, not to let the cat out of the bag too much, but yeah, no, everyone knows. So I was wondering, based on our own experiences of looking into how we're going to be able to sell that and distribute that, if that's even possible, have you faced any significant challenges with regards to licensing? I don't know exactly how it is in Michigan, but I mean, like there's a difference between how beer is taxed and wine and things like that. Like I know here at the brewery we can make beer, we couldn't make a cider, and
right.
If we were to distribute it, we need a distiller's license or something, and it gets really weird. Have you had any trouble with that?
Well, every state is going to be a little bit different. You're going to have to follow federal laws first, and obviously you probably know the TTB is the agency that regulates alcohol production. The TTB has a winemaker's license, a distilling license, and a brewer's license. And for the purposes of mead and cider, that falls under the winemaker's license. Now, in South Dakota, they may look at cider a little differently. Like I know Georgia, for instance, considers cider a beer product, but I don't know if that's for manufacturing or just distribution. So most likely, you're definitely going to need a winemaker's license at the TTB level, and then depending on what South Dakota considers cider to be, you would probably need a winemaker's license as well. And for distribution, you may need something entirely different.
So now that the world knows, we actually are working with a winery too. So we'll see how that comes out. I think we're venturing into uncharted territory here, at least in this area. I think we've got another one here. This is Toby. I'm sure Toby's you lived just south.
Yeah, don't tell him I lived in Ohio. That creates bad.
Oh, that place. It's either that or down the river.
As Seth mentioned, I think a meadery is kind of a new concept to South Dakota here, and so I'm curious, from your perspective, like someone who might not know what meads are or might be a little skeptical about trying something different, how would you make the case that this is something that they should give a try?
Well, anybody who's open-minded enough to want to try all the different styles of beer they come across is certainly not going to want to stop until they've tried mead, and probably continue on after they've tried mead, because like beer, there are many different styles and variations. When I first tried mead the first time, I thought, what's the big deal? Because it was not really good mead, But in the back of Charlie Papazian's Complete Joy of Homebrewing, he's writing about this poetically and as if this is the greatest thing in the world. And so I said to myself, I'm probably missing something, So there's a lot of really good arguments to get people to try it. I mean, in this foodie culture, I don't think they would have any difficulty getting people to try it. Getting people to come back for it is always the challenge.
I had a question from the back here. They had asked, what is the rarest type of honey or the most expensive? Like, are there honeys out there that you just can't get your hands on?
Yeah, there's heather honey in Scotland is really hard to get. Apparently, I've never tried, but it's extremely expensive if you can get a hold of it in the States, especially. There's a honey called Tupelo, which, if you're familiar with the Van Morrison song, sweet as Tupelo honey, there's really a honey from a Tupelo tree. And it is one of the most fantastic honeys I've ever had. But it's a short bloom, and the beekeepers have to go in, harvest the honey, and clear it out and move the bees, or they start picking up other flowers that are blooming at the time. However, I think the most rare and sought-after honey is the psychedelic honey from Turkey, where there's a festival every year where you take a little thimble full of this honey, and apparently it's the bees collecting honey from the psychedelic flower, and it really makes you trip balls.
So we're going to see a mead from that here in the coming days?
I don't think I can get approval from the TTB on that one, but there may be a homebrewed version of it floating around. Though I've heard more than a teaspoonful is deadly.
I'm glad you brought up the TTB. The TTB has been working to maybe relinquish some of the requirements when adding things outside of the normal for brewer. When we talk about oak or fortification and stuff. Do you see that meaderies are following the same trends when it comes to oak and bourbon and even more? I mean, do you have a hopped version? Like, where do you think mead's going?
I mean, we're just following you guys. You guys are like our big brothers, and we're just kind of like, oh, I want to do that too. The problem is because we're licensed as a winery, the federal government looks to what we do as trying to trick somebody. Because back in the day, when people were selling elixirs and different types of tonics and medicines and whatnot, it was generally
snake oil, generally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And furthermore, there was a big thing in the United States back in early wine making times where people would actually sell wine that was kind of cheap, by fortification or sweetening up with maple syrup or other cheap forms of sugar rather than using grapes. And unfortunately, those laws are still on the books that prevent us from using certain ingredients. We've tried to make maple syrup mead, and there's ways around it, but when the two are fermented together, they consider maple syrup as an adjunct, and that adjunct is not allowable in the production of wine. And since mead is a wine, it by default requires us to follow all their rules. We're learning how to get around it pretty well. I mean, we've done dozens and dozens of recipes. Unfortunately, everything we do has to go through formulation, which is basically like a different statement process or recipe that has to be submitted to the TTB, and they can literally take 3 months to get approved.
I see a lot of bearded gentlemen around there. Looks like you're running a proper establishment. I think you judge usually a brewery by their beards.
Proper, I don't know. That's pretty subjective. But, we do have a little tap room going, like I said, in the front of the place, and you know, literally, it's just a keg fridge in the front of our warehouse.
Hi guys, welcome to Brookings. You guys look like you got it going on down there.
Yeah. So this is it. You know, there's nothing too fancy going on here. It's just like hanging out in someone's garage, like I said.
Real fancy.
But they're all, you know, they're all good people. We don't kick them out, you know.
Well, Slanche, it looks like you've got something good going there. One of the questions I always like to ask is, for those viewers out there and the people that always come to us asking, I want to do a brewery, I want to do a meadery, what words of lasting advice would you give them? If somebody says, I'm going to do a meadery, what do you tell them?
Be prepared to not really make any money. Work long hours and expect that you're just going to be a dishwasher. And one day, you know, if your product's really good and your marketing is really good, you may actually be able to make more than minimum wage.
Living the dream. I think that's actually the universal answer. You might have read that from the note card from one of the previous meetings. I think we're going to open it up for just a couple. Anybody got a couple more questions about the mead? Everybody gets to try some? I think we're getting the thumbs up here. We give you a very warm welcome to South Dakota and to Brookings. We really appreciate your time. Keep making good meads. We're looking forward to the different ones you can send out. Chris has one more. Chris is gonna submit the closer here. All right, hold on. We got one more question for you.
This one's actually from Ange in the back, but I don't think she can get out here at the moment. I was wondering this today. If someone who makes beer is called a brewer, what is someone who makes mead called?
We just call them mead makers. Really boring, I know.
I'm really glad to go out on a bang. Thank you.
Maybe let's get creative and we'll start a hashtag for mead makers. We'll see if we can figure something else besides mead maker. Misers, Mazers,
Mazers, but Mazer is technically the name for a drinking vessel from which you drink mead.
Huh. And I can guess right every once in a while. All right, Brad, we appreciate your time today. We will post this up to YouTube. You guys keep making meads, and if you ever make it out to South Dakota, stop on by the pub here.
Not if, when.
All right, cheers, mate. Have a good night.
All right, cheers. Thanks, everybody. Bye.